Welcome to episode 5. The reading for this week is chapter 5 through into chapter 6 till you reach verse 26, which means we are now well into Jesus' Galilean ministry. In this section, we find that although Jesus engages in supernatural combat and profound teaching, he also comes down to where we are and gets personal. Firstly, Jesus begins to call disciples. Now, the word disciple means a learner or follower. Jesus is not an internet influencer who stays at home remotely connecting with fans. He walks into people's lives and calls them to be with him. And the most famous, of course, are the 12 disciples, and their stories begin here. To help identify them, it's worth knowing that it was common to use more than one name. So Simon Peter is Peter, and Levi is actually the more famous Matthew. So Jesus calls them, and what he says and who he is so compelling they completely rearrange their lives to follow him. Now, abandoning your ordinary life is not really generally expected of Christians, but being a follower of Jesus does include a call on our hearts of similar magnitude to turn and follow, learn and live with Jesus. And these callings also reveal Jesus' identity again. Peter's miraculous catch might seem a bit twee to us, but for an experienced subsistence fisherman, the impossible just happened, and it shakes him. He concludes Jesus is direct from the Holy God and tells him to look away from his inadequacies. But Jesus stays put and says, "Come." Why is that? Well, let's answer that with the famous story in verses 17 to 26 of the 4 friends lowering the man into the room. There's a strange twist to this story. Jesus does not immediately deal with his physical problem, but his spiritual. He's not saying his illness is caused by sin. He's making a point. I'm not here only to heal your physical life, but your life with God. The religious leaders are outraged, but their conclusion is correct. The Pharisees and teachers of the law began thinking to themselves, "Who is this fellow who speaks blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" This is why Peter is welcome to follow Jesus, and also Levi, who is a despised tax collector working for the Romans. Jesus reaches out with God's forgiveness and a new start. Let's put all this alongside the compass. Jesus is a man with God's authority to forgive sin. He's reached out to a manual labourer smelling of fish and a well-to-do civil servant. He is offering forgiveness of sins, which is a vital key to navigating Luke and the whole story of Jesus. Jesus healed bodies, but more so he healed souls. And we'll finish with the block of teaching that we find in 5:33 through to 6:26. This is a bit more complex, and we can only touch on some pointers, and I'll split it into 2 and give a little bit of local knowledge that I hope marks a path through this terrain. Verse 33 through to 6:5. Jesus' actions provoke a discussion on God's law. In the Old Testament, God gave Israel a stack of guidelines to live by to build a holy nation. Now, some of the religious leaders seem to see these as an end in themselves. Do the law please God? And Jesus says, yes, but the laws are not an end, nor sufficient in themselves. After all, no one keeps them perfectly. That's why there's a complex sacrificial system at the temple. Instead, Jesus implies these laws point to someone. They anticipate someone who will explain and fulfill them properly. And that someone is Jesus. That's why he calls himself the bridegroom and the Lord of the Sabbath. Because of who he is, he's able to open a fuller way to live for God. Which takes us to 6:20 through to 26. The Sermon on the Plain, which is like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. Jesus is teaching some similar ideas, but on a different occasion. He's saying to the people who are following him or considering following him, here is the way to live your life for God. And we'll pick that up next time as we conclude this section of teaching. Here are some questions which might help with your reading. Question 1. Why do you think Peter tries to put distance between Jesus and himself? How might you have responded in Peter's place? Question 2. Why does Jesus liken himself to a doctor who has come to treat the sick? Question 3. Does Jesus' willingness to reach out to anyone challenge you or give you hope? And question 4. In the teaching section of 6:20 to 26, does anything here challenge your view of life? What kind of community might emerge if these values were absorbed? Thanks for being with us today, and hope to see you again next Friday.